The Somua used to be one of the more competitive tier 8 heavy tanks, but can it still actually hold up against some of the more power creep options at tier 8? Well, today's video is going to showcase you two replays that focus on the Somua and it just being still very, very insane to play. But ultimately, let's jump into the gameplay and showcase why this tank is still quite powerful, and even in a tank that is maybe non-meta as much as it used to be, then yeah, let's jump in. The first replay that we have in today's video is looking at Cliff, and this is a really good map for this 5-shot autoloader that's capable of clipping even the tier 8 heavy tanks that are in the game. And of course, you're seeing that up against low tier vehicles. It's just not balanced whatsoever, and that's how the STRV-74 certainly met his match against a tank that is just way too powerful to be able to try and take it out. Or maybe he just got a little bit too unlucky to meet the Somua fully loaded at the beginning of the game. But either way, the Somua SM so far picking up 1300 damage straight away, and this is what this tank does perfectly, and you'll see it do this throughout all of the replays, and we'll consistently see this happen both in this first replay and also the second one, because we've got two really high damage gameplays and probably the best damage gameplay that you'll see in this tank altogether. But obviously, meeting up against Tigers is an ideal target in something like this because of the fact that you just basically never bounce. And although many of the vehicles that you'll come up against will be able to bounce off of you, it doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot for the majority of players. And when you come up against some more powerful tanks anyway, because you know you do have that alpha damage advantage over most tanks. And so with the Somua, you have to make sure that you are positioning yourself such that maybe if someone decides to YOLO you, you're going to be able to either A, have your team support if you're reloading, or just have that alpha damage to clip them out. So you need to avoid any scenarios where you come up against preferably multiple tanks at once, or at least if there are multiple tanks that you're able to A, be able to clip both of them because they're on reduced damage, or that you know your team are going to be able to punish them if they decide to push. Now, for example, this Type 59 that's pushed up here is of course going to be getting punished by the teammates, or at least that's what you'd be hoping. And luckily the armor of the Somua does actually hold up for the first time probably in most people's experience in the last maybe 2 years, since it really was at the peak of its performance in terms of being super strong. But already within this replay, 4000 damage, and this is what this tank does best. In a top tier matchup where you have vehicles that just are not capable of really dealing with a tank like this, then you can come away with some outstanding results, and that's ultimately what this whole channel is focused around. So hopefully it's given you a good indication that you don't always have to play broken tanks. And talking about a broken tank, it's always nice to see the ruiner of tier 8 get punished for probably the first time in existence of the BZ176. Of course, that's what we're talking about. But quite successfully, another full round of damage done, or a full clip I should say, and picking up just over 5,500 damage. So really nice beginning to this game on Cliff. And granted, the matchup is fairly nice, you know, you're coming up against a lot of opponents that are lower tier than you. Coming up against tier 6 feels definitely somewhat, well, it is broken really when you think about it, because you don't even have to land all of your shells to successfully take them out. Now, one tank you probably don't want to come up against is a KV2. It's possible for them to pen you in the side because you are essentially, if you think about it, a heavily armoured version of an AMX 5120. Now the rear armour and the side armour of this tank is paper, so you do get penned quite easily, but you have to rely upon that the main armament, which is what makes this tank really superb. So with 7,000 damage done within the first 5 minutes of the battle opening, you are definitely in a great position, and this is what you want in the Somua. Now, the team is actually doing fairly average, you know, they're down by 300 hit points, there's nothing too spectacular going on in that department, but the department that you really want to focus on is avoiding any damage during that reload period, and you're seeing that here with some excellent kind of avoidance maneuvers. You know, we all know about it, doing ring around the rosy against some of the non-turreted tanks in the game. It's always good, and luckily, quite luckily actually, the Somua does avoid the shell of this SU-100. Now, You know, that could have gone either way. The side armor of this tank is just absolute garbage, and the fact that the round actually hit the turret, and in particular it actually hit the gun, then you know you can come away with a result where you don't actually end up going back to the garage yourself, even if you have done the amount of damage that's already been done in this one. But it's not over yet, and this is what the Somua does really well. It's a tank that can last the entire battle because in this sort of matchup you do have a little bit of armor, but I'm not going to say that this tank is going to be able to outperform all of the shitters that might be on the enemy team, because we all know about them. They're all around, then they can YOLO you quite hard, and things like the higher tier vehicles, you know, things like the Jaegeru, stuff like that are gonna just go through you like butter. Any of the higher alpha, high penetration tank destroyers ruin this tank's day completely, and so it can certainly be a experience in all senses to play this tank, but when played correctly, when played well, it almost feels like it's just cracked within the game. And that's really dependent on the matchmaking as to whether you can have games like this. And not to say that we're trying to detract anything from the gameplay and replay here, because picking up 8,000 damage in any tier 8 is exceptionally good, and you have to be able to know your positioning and where to be in your tank to come out with a result like this. But the Somua is probably more well versed, and maybe a tank that can carry in these sorts of scenarios a lot better. So that's really what I feel like the Somua does really well. But what else does the Somua have other than the fact that you can deal a ton of damage in one salvo, and then you can kind of hide away? Well, it has a decent level of mobility. Are you in the realms of a light tank? Absolutely not. It is not as fast as maybe if a premium version of this was to be released in 2023, but you can definitely pump out and churn out a lot of damage on opponents quite readily, and you can see here with just basically only tier 7s and 6s left on the enemy team, it is the game to win, and you can certainly win in a tank like this. So in that exchange, picked up another couple of hits of damage on the Super Hellcat, whilst also dealing some damage to the KV-2 who was spotted on the enemy team. And this is really where Cliff becomes your friend, and you can pump a load of tanks. But unfortunately, it does actually end up being the final hit from the Black Prince, appearing to go through the upper plate potentially, or even going down into the cupola, because remember, the turret armor used to be very good, but maybe not against the premium rounds that are currently available within World of Tanks. But 9,300 damage in a tank like this is superb, and if you want to check out the post-game results, we'll jump into the next battle first, and then we'll have a look at both of them to just showcase what exactly happened within the game and how good of a game it actually ended up being. Now then, the next gameplay starts off with a bang, and especially against a T-34-100 that for some reason doesn't understand what an autoloader is, and as soon as people make that mistake, they end up losing 90 to 100% of their hit points, especially at this lower tier. And that's what we saw in the previous replay, but it doesn't mean that it happens every single time, and you can certainly rely upon the consistency that the Somua does have, because with the base values of dispersion on this vehicle, you've got 0.38 accuracy, which is by no means absolutely garbage, but you can get that down to about 0.34 accuracy if you've got some of the bonuses that you can apply both to your commander and also with vents and stuff like that. You can reduce it even further, and I highly recommend doing that, because in an autoloader it's super crucial that you do not get fucked up by any RNG that might be within the game. So it's all about maintaining that kind of level of gameplay to the point where you can be consistent, because it's even more important in something like this to be able to do that. Now, the Somua, knowing exactly that the enemy team are just not in the right positions, or maybe they go AFK like a Black Prince, who for some reason, absolutely not knowing what he's doing at all, decides to sit out in the open. So very easy game so far, picking up once again a ton of damage at the beginning stages of the battle, and 2 minutes into the game, picking up 2,300 damage is really nice. And that's where the effective damage per minute of the Somua is just outrageously good, because we all talk about having like superb damage per minute, or having like ridiculous amounts of damage that you can dish out all in one go, but effective DPM is the most important, and that is down to the fact that You can pull round a corner, you can consistently deal the damage, only receive maybe 1 or 2 hits if you play it right, and sometimes and often the best players will avoid taking any hits whatsoever, and that's really where you want to be. Now unfortunately, not able to pen the first or second shell on the Type 59. It's a bit disappointing, only 1 round received, so it's not a big problem, but you could see there the penetration not able to lock down the opponents, but the Scorpion G definitely feeling a little bit worse for wear after popping around the corner. Now, you know, you don't want to lose too much hit points in your autoloaders at the beginning of the game, and I know that this is a lot of information about this tank, but we'll slow it down and maybe we'll even chuck in a third replay to further my argument that this tank is still very, very competitive within the game, as I'm sure you already know given the first replay, and with this replay really starting to kick up. Now then, a lot of people on Himmelsdorf will typically go in the banana line, especially if you're in a heavy tank, which is the sort of place you want to be, because you want to be able to farm up these heavy tanks with poor DPM and be able to dish out your damage with your full clip. And if you do that, you're able to chunk away 90 to 95% of tier 8 heavy tanks, much like the Lerva just received there. And of course, doing that consistently throughout the game and positioning yourself in a point that you're seeing here, as opposed to traditionally fighting on the corner, which is not the Somua's strong point, and definitely not how you should be playing this tank in most places, can yield these results where you just dominate opponents essentially. So 4,500 damage, really nice gameplay so far, and that's really the crux, I guess, of playing the Somua well, is that a lot of people will try to play it as a traditional heavy tank, but remember, it is not a traditional heavy tank. You've basically got to I guess play it as if it was a AMX 5100 that maybe can bounce a few rounds, but you should never ever rely upon your armor in the Somua, and that's really where I feel like a lot of people have the biggest amount of hassle, and where maybe you won't if you ever come up against this thing, or if you do indeed decide to pick this tank up at some point, or maybe if you're just trying to learn about the Somua in general, if you do decide to you know, find out or purchase it at some point. But at this point in the game, it's looking pretty dire for his team, and with 5,900 hit points left on the enemy team, only 1,700 left on the friendly team, you would almost assume that this is a loss. Now, the Somua player here definitely does not accept that this is a loss, and there is something he can do, and in doing so, he decides to make the aggressive play against the Lerva, and as he does that, the Lerva actually just derps a shot. I have no idea what he's doing, but he doesn't hang around long, because remember, with a tank that has such a long reload, I think you're looking at about a 35-second reload, if off the top of my head. I believe you're looking about that. Of course, it can vary dependent on your skills, dependent on your crew, dependent on your equipment. But yeah, you're looking at about 35 seconds, maybe 32 seconds if you max it out with ventilation and stuff like that. But either way, the key thing is what I'm trying to get at, without convoluting it too much, is that positioning is always key. And you're seeing here that our player here knows exactly where that position was not good. Because as soon as you're as soon as you're reloading, essentially, things like the Tiger 1, which has fairly good damage per minute for a tier 7, can pepper you, and with the premium rounds that the Tiger 1 gets, your armor basically becomes zilch. There's no point in having your armor. But the enemy team don't seem to be aware that the Somua has left the initial position. And so you've got things like the Super Hellcat, the T-34-100, the Tiger 1, the 53 TP on the enemy team, and you've also got a Su-14-1. And now that we know that there are pretty much all of the tanks left on the enemy team, and where their positions are, you can make your plays dependent upon that. And you'd have to throw this pretty hard if you were to not be able to take out the Super Hellcat, because with the potential damage that you can deal, with the kind of overwhelming odds that this tank can overcome with its one clip, especially coming up against multiple opponents on low hit points, you're basically going to win every single time, especially if they overpeak and stuff like that. So I'm not taking it too much to heart. The 5100 does indeed take the reload, and this is one of the smartest things that he does during this replay. And that allows him to push and advance towards the T-34. The T-34, for all he knows, the Somua is actually fully reloaded, so he has no idea at all whether or not he's going to come up against him. And in fact, you can use this to your advantage in a tank like this, where people know that this thing is super dangerous, and so you can often actually use your reload time as a baiting period where you can come up against people. They're really scared about the fact that they could get hit even though you're reloading, especially if they don't know it, and that's where you can take that as an advantage. Now then, so far, you know, it's a 1 versus 3, and with 2,600 hit points left on the enemy team, you have got to do some pretty stonking amounts of damage without receiving a hit, and it means that within one clip, it's not possible at all to take the tanks left on the enemy team out. And you know what the usual Himmelsdorf location to stay in is over here, and the Tiger 1 enters the cap. Now, this is not particularly good because the Tiger 1 is on a decent 3 shot, so there's 4 shots in the clip, and so you've got to almost hope that whatever it is that is also in the cap circle is on a 1 shot, and fingers crossed he is. So with a pretty aggressive play here, you're seeing the Tiger 1, and yes, it appears as though the final tank is a 1 shot, which is lovely, and now trying to bait the shell, which is perfect. He does indeed do that. But now there's a 50 TP on the enemy team who is on full health, or at least a 53 TP. And this is not good. Not good at all. And so with a 53 TP, which could potentially 1-shot you, you've essentially got to fully clip this vehicle and not low roll to be able to take him out. In fact, you have to high roll the 53 TP to successfully take this tank out. But with a good little shot into the 53 TP using this area here, he's able to hit him once. So high rolls on the first shell, bounces the second shell, means you have to now take a reload, and that's exactly what he does. Another really good use of the reload within World of Tanks, and the 53 TP now has to make 2 choices. Either he pushes the AMX 5100, well, not the 5100, what am I on about? The Somua, and hopefully is going to be able to get there before he reloads, or number 2, he's got to kind of hope he can hold a corner and actually hit the shot to be able to secure the damage, because if he doesn't, it's basically going to be game over for him. And so in a nice little swift movement, you're seeing him move into this position. You can actually come up from the side of the 53 TP. Now, fingers crossed, he is indeed in this position, and unfortunately for him, he does not realise, and maybe it's a bot, we don't actually know, but 2 shells, 3 shells into the side of him, 4 shells into the side of him, and then the final shell into the side of the 53 TP, and securing the victory against 3 tanks. And that's really what the Somua can offer. It's this whole aggressive, super dangerous tank that if left alive for too long will certainly rip holes in your team. But let's actually jump into the third replay before we finish it up actually. Now, this next replay, you're going to have to see the Somua overcome 3 BZ-176s on the enemy team, which is a challenge in itself regardless of what vehicle you're in, because of the fact that that can basically 2-shot you within the game. And unfortunately, he does have to take 1 shell in being able to kind of push into this position, which is not ideal in any senses of the word, but you're seeing here him try to lock down this BZ on the enemy team, and this is one of the most satisfying things I've seen in a long time, managing to not only deal a ton of damage to the BZ, making it actually worth the hit that he received, which is pretty much very, very difficult in a lot of games, and that's probably what's kept this tank being so competitive as it currently is within the game and throughout the years, is because that autoloader never really changes, and so you're still, regardless of what tanks you're coming up against, you have that 1500 total damage that you can deal in all 5 shells within your clip. And that's a really nice play here at the beginning of the game to deal with a lot of these overpowered tanks that will definitely come back and bite you in the backside or the ass if you do not decide to take them out quick enough. The AMX AC on the enemy team, of course, getting caught out in not a great position, especially when you've got someone sausage sandwiching you, and with that final shell, unfortunately going high and wide of the where you saw the aiming circle actually come in. Yeah, a little bit disappointing, but so far, both the BZs that push this corner taken out, lovely, perfect work, and with just one more BZ on the enemy team playing somewhere unknown so far, you've got to be a little bit careful because you'd never really want to take another BZ hit. Last spotted near the cap, but that means absolutely nothing at this point, so he could be anywhere, so just making sure you aren't over pushing or being overly aggressive will definitely come and help you out later on down the line. But a lovely perfect scenario, being able to hit. Unfortunately tries to go for the shell on the tanks in the middle, doesn't quite hit it. I mean, it was an impossible shot, to be honest. You'd have to get super lucky to be able to deal with that. But another shell goes into our friend there in, of course, a pretty decent tank as well in the G-Saw. But once again, we are, like a couple minutes into the replay. This, of course, is a much faster replay, and you're in a more aggressive place where you have to push towards the cap circle, because if you don't, you're not going to win the game. And actually, it's one of those where one team just literally has an advantage against you, because they can either win by taking you all out, or they can win if you don't push into their base. And so, yeah, it's kind of annoying, I guess, to have these sorts of games, especially if you have the advantage in tanks or numbers and you just don't quite get around to finishing everyone off, and especially considering the fact that you get a lot less time than you do with a lot of things. But a nice couple of shots into the T-32, this is really what you want, but you're seeing here the standard rounds kind of struggling against the T-32. And that's because they don't have amazing penetration. They're not like your modern day equivalent premium rounds. They got 232mm of pen, which to all intents and purposes is capable for most vehicles in the game. But when you're coming up against tier 10s, when you're coming up against armor that maybe is a little bit more heavily armored, they certainly can be a little bit disappointing. But one thing they will never struggle to pen is a Lorraine 40T. And so 2 shells consecutively in there, reloading once again, making sure to use the reload at the right time makes this tank so much more rewarding and better in general. So I save you the despair of watching a reload again, since you've seen quite a few in this replay. And of course now finding the enemy BZ who's out in the open. But remember, this tank is just a nuisance, and so it's actually a struggle to pen. And once again, like we said just a second ago, with the penetration of the standard rounds 232, it's not a guaranteed pen at all to come up against the BZ, which is not fun, especially from range with the accuracy that you do have. But you can still make it work, and so you have to kind of prioritize your targets, choose the ones that you can pen, because there's no point shooting something that you can't, and if you can remove the hit points off of the enemy team, you're going to have a better chance at winning. And 2 shells go in, 1 goes wide, no idea if they both penned, but we'll have to wait and see. But you're seeing here 4,200 damage has been done, the BZ's camping in the base, you know how it is. Basically, Corellia on this matchup is essentially a camp fest, especially for the enemy team. So you were already at a massive disadvantage playing in this game. But you're seeing here, finally, the premium rounds come out, which is really refreshing to see, because often you see a lot of players just loading premium from the start, which is not necessarily really required in this vehicle. It certainly helps, but once again, you don't have to do it. And that's nice. And you can see here with the penetration, it's able to deal with this BZ. I believe you've got in the region of 260mm of pen, 263. And there we go, picking up another 1,000 damage against the opponents, which is really, really nice to see. But at this point, you're starting to think, well, 2.5 minutes left on the battle is not a lot of time. And if you've got to cap, you've essentially got to get all the remaining teammates in there to be able to do it on time. Of course, remember that the Somua is nowhere near the cap circle, so it's basically not going to happen from this point. But you can really rely upon trying to take out the rest of the enemy team. Now, you could potentially do that, but you'll need some help from some of your teammates. There is time to be able to do that, so fingers crossed we're going to be able to see that. But with a few misses there, it's making it harder and harder for that to happen. But a lovely shot finishing off the Skoda T56, and it's all about target priority. The Skoda T56, we all know about it, the kind of modern equivalent of I guess the double bumpers, which were released quite a while ago now, but at this point the Skoda is a vehicle you want to get out the game, because he could crunch away the last remaining hit points on your vehicle very easily, and he's not going to struggle to go through our vehicle here in the Somua. So this is the sort of position in the game where you start to think, well, there's a minute and 20 seconds left, there's 4 enemy tanks, you can't really YOLO into them, and this is where I guess the Somua is a little bit disappointing, because the view range is okay, and by okay I mean it's what you'd expect from a heavy / medium hybrid-y type thing. It's nothing fantastic, but you can make it work. But trying to outspot tanks that are going to be sat in a bush, things like the Primo Victoria, which are traditional medium tanks, and some of the others, then you're not going to be able to do anything. And actually at this point in the battle, it may be too late now to be able to fully clip out the rest of the team. You'd have to high roll pretty much every single shell, and that is not a good sign. Bouncing off of the BZ, hopefully the teammates here can help him out, but now it's time to rush, and hopefully the ramming damage can help him out. So he saves a shell there. You would normally have to fire a shell, but the Primo Victoria on the enemy team of course sat in the back, and maybe the Barask on his platoon is going to be able to deal with the Primo Victoria, and then you've got to hope that the T-44-100 gets spotted and you can finish him off. But at this point it is not looking likely, and it's that what really frustrates me within World of Tanks, where your player has been outstanding and you have to lose to a player that's probably been camping for the majority of the game, or maybe done a few hundred damage, and that's really disappointing. But let's jump into the post-battle results, because although we picked up 6,400 damage shown within this replay so far, it's not necessarily how much damage was actually done. So let's look at all of the results of the replays and give the final analysis, as well as a quick look at the armor model as to how you can take this tank out if you were to see a player like these playing in the Somua. So here we have the collision model of the Somua. So nothing too spectacular in terms of armor layout, but what about the way in which people can angle to make this tank actually kind of surprisingly difficult to pen, especially for lower tier vehicles? Up against higher tier vehicles, 200mm of effective armor is basically an automatic pen through the upper plate, but you also have a super strong lower plate, and often people will go for the lower plate thinking that they're going to be able to pen it. Now that is just not the case, and actually the lower plate and upper plate have pretty much the same amount of armor. Probably the lower plate has more armor in fact, but let's have a look at the live model to see exactly what I mean. So you can see here pretty much a guaranteed pen through the front using the Somua itself, and of course the turret being a key weak point. You have the weakest armor around the turret areas. Now there are some kind of troll areas that you can see on the turret, and they kind of come underneath the gun. You've also got some really nice angling on the side cheeks that can help you pen or avoid taking a pen. And also there's just some random kind of curves on the turret to occasionally pull a bounce, but you're not reliably going to be able to do that. And it's these cheeks, the flat cheeks that we can see in the visual model that really become a problem here and here. So if you ever come across the Somua and you can only see the turret, you want to be aiming at the cheeks here, much like the T-57 Heavy if you've come up against it, where you've got those big flaps either side of the gun mantlet which you can pen, or alternatively you can go for the cupolas, which are trash, especially this top left hand one if you're driving it, for example this one here. And of course, you can still pen the area up here. It just depends on the angling. Of course, if it's using its gun depression, it can be a little bit more difficult, but it's still not awful. And of course, it still exposes that big, chunky cupola that you have on the top of the vehicle. And also these cheeks still become super easy to pen. So just making sure that you are penning every single time when this thing advances toward you is something that you can utilize. And you do need to do that if you are thinking about coming up against something like this and it's fully reloaded. Of course, if you know that it's fully unloaded, then you can use that 35-second delay between them reloading and being able to fire their next shot to be able to get around the side. And this is what I meant by the side armor being pretty trash. You're looking at 90mm of side armor. It does avoid being able to be overmatched by most, well, pretty much every single gun in the game. So it's kind of difficult to be able to get penned. Now, the lower side armor is really the weaker point, but remember, tracks are kind of adding to it, and so you don't really want to be firing there. I always try and go for the back of this vehicle because you have a chance to set the Somua on fire, and it being a French vehicle is not that hard to do. So if you ever come up against the side, it's huge as well, so super easy to pen. And the rear of the tank is actually surprisingly okay. So you've got about 80mm on the back of the hull, and of course significantly less on the back of the turret. So you can kind of utilize that as you will, but if you were to decide to try an angle in the Somua, the ideal angle that you want to be at is this sort of profile where you're looking in this sort of direction, and you can see here up to 230mm on the side, so you can definitely bounce rounds, and hence why you saw that happen within a few replays. But yeah, it kind of is this lower plate. As soon as you start giving this, it can definitely become a problem, and of course the upper plate is also a problem to any tier vehicle really firing premium rounds, and as soon as you start loading those premium rounds, it's pretty much 100% chance of going through, but you can still bounce on the odd occasion. But yeah, it's a lot harder for people to bounce against the Somua than it probably was a few years ago, with just penetration values typically on the rise. One thing that you've got to be aware of as well is that if you are cresting ridgeline, so if, for example, you're doing this sort of strat, there is this horrible bit right here where if you overexpose the hull armor of the vehicle, people can actually pen up through the tracks into the armor. So it's not a nice area at all. So just be aware of that. And you really want to bait people to the point where, like, you know, you're not showing anything really of your hull armor whatsoever. So if you can do that, then that's ideal. But remember, this big cupola, the lower plate is not really a weak point on the Somua. So, you know, if you can pen the lower plate, then you can pen the upper plate pretty much. But other than that, that's really the statistics and armor of the Somua. Let's have a look at the replays and how much damage was actually done. So the first replay that was undertaken, of course, by Pollock XD, managed to pick up 350,000 silver, remember, probably obtained by using boosts and maybe completing some operations, 21,500 experience, which is unbelievable, as well as getting the Mastery Badge, Arsonist, Bruiser, Fire for Effect, Duelist, Tank Sniper, Top Gun and High Caliber, with no surprise considering the 9,300 damage done, 2,341 base experience. That is insane, absolutely insane, and with 7 enemies taken out as well. Really, really amazing result, and it was a brilliant replay to showcase how just dangerous this tank can be even in today's meta. But let's have a look at the next one. We've got then the replay on Himmelsdorf, played by Allier, and we have 474,000 silver. This is, of course, picking up 8 kills for the Radley Walters medal, the Defender, High Caliber, Top Gun, Hand of God, a Mastery Badge, and of course clutching the 1 versus 3 at the end of the game, picking up 8,082 damage with 2,279 base experience, not managing to really pick up any assistance within this game. But it doesn't matter a whole lot considering the 304,000 silver made within the game. And yeah, just an insane carry at the end to really make it work. And then finally, we have the final game by Sheriff Pancake, managing to pick up another 356,000 silver, a Mastery Badge, Confederate, High Caliber, coming top on in game, obviously on damage, only really losing out to the T-44 100 on the enemy team. But either way, still picking up more base experience than the T-44-100 and being able to, in all senses, really win the game, to be honest with you, even though it was a loss technically. But yeah, picking up 245,000 profit. Did spend quite a bit on ammunition, but you know, sometimes you do actually have to fire premium in this thing to make it work, especially in those tier 9 and 10 games, which you can meet in the Somua. But hopefully this has shown everything that you really need to know about the Somua SM, and maybe why you should actually get this tank within the game, or at least be aware how good this tank can be in the right hands, and with all of the right skills, all of the perks, and just generally playing it to its utmost ability. It is certainly still powerful within World of Tanks. Hopefully you did enjoy this video, but if you want to go above and beyond just watching the video, then it would be a massive pleasure if you would join me by subscribing on the channel, and of course staying tuned with all of the replays and content that we'll be producing over the next year, because we're hoping to really grow the channel during 2023 and onwards, and just continue just doing what we're doing, and hopefully you'll be a part of that. But if you aren't, please let me know what you think I could improve. If you want me to do anything extra within the replays, let me know. But other than that, it was a brilliant one, brilliant 3 replays, and the Somua SM is definitely a tank I think I would certainly think about purchasing or playing within World of Tanks. And thank you very much for watching. Hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.